Bonjour and bienvenue today on the Rendez-Vous with, again, your favorite French teachers, Tim, and myself, Alex. Today we have the chance to host one of the most influential person here in the United States. And it's interesting because, as you can see, we're not at our usual studio. We're at the French residence here in Washington, D.C. Please, everyone, welcome the French ambassador of the United States, Philippe Étienne.
And, welcome to the French residence, Tim and Alex. It's a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Merci d'être avec nous. We're so excited to be here. This is an absolutely beautiful place. I just wanted to give a little background to our guest about who you are, because you have a pretty crazy background. You were born in Neuilly-sur-Seine, not too far from where we grew up, actually. He grew up in the 17th. I grew up in Ivry-sur-Seine and then Gif-sur-Yvette, which is a little down south. But yeah, no. What's crazy is that you worked for the French government, and you're now the French ambassador of the United States. You also speak English, German, Spanish, Russian, and Romanian quite fluently. But you said you speak even more languages than that, right?
As a diplomat, I thought I had to learn. Anyway, I wanted to learn the language of the countries where I was posted. Obviously, some of those languages were very close one from the other. So, for instance, I learned Serbian and Croatian and Polish, but now the Russian has been the last Slavic language I've learned. So it is the one I remember more than the others. Same thing for Portuguese and Spanish.
Which one was the hardest to learn?
That's a good question. Because all of those languages are more or less Indo-European, so they are not that difficult compared to Chinese or Mandarin, or Japanese. But probably I would say the Russian is really interesting, but with a different alphabet, and which is not as such so difficult, but maybe to really get into the spirit of the language.
The spirit of the language. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by the spirit of the language?
It's what I would call the spirit of a language. It's to get as deep as possible into the way a language is constructed, because it expresses also the mentalities. And it belongs both to the vocabulary, but also to the grammar, to the syntax. And it's fascinating, I find.
It takes way more than just learning words and structures when you learn a language. I agree with you.
No, exactly. It's a combination of elements, and also reading literature, listening to the people. It belongs to that.
Yeah. So to come back on what you were saying, so you're saying that reading and listening to people really helped you learn languages. What are the best techniques and methods to learn a language for people that are listening and want to learn French, for example?
I think it depends very much on you and every person interested by a language. If you are interested by a language, there must be a reason for that. It must start with somewhere and with something, maybe with somebody.
Okay.
Set a goal too.
So you have to follow your inclination, your inspiration. It might be, to go to the country. It might even be to learn lists of words, actually. And it might be to read one important work of the literature in that language. I think you have to let you guided into the world which a language represents.
I agree with you. When you're learning a language, it's just much more than what you think. You're learning about a country, about a culture, about their background,
exactly,
about the people there. And I feel like when I came here, learning English was way easier because I was just involved in the American culture.
When you're involved in a culture, when you live it, it's a lot easier to understand, because we don't always learn the language. The literature language is not necessarily the spoken language.
Absolutely.
Same in French.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll get into this. So obviously, you're the French ambassador here in the United States. How did you adopt to a new environment, a different culture? Because you lived in a lot of different countries. You lived in Romania as well.
Exactly. And this is also a good question, because when you're ambassador of France to another country, it's not that easy to live really inside this country, this culture, because first you are in a French administration, so which is normal. You have you work every day
It's
with
your
your
job.
with your team, and you represent France. You have to remain French, but also because you have a life which is not the life of everybody, of course. You have many privileges, but you live in I wouldn't say in an artificial life. It is not artificial, but it's a certain, and again, very privileged way of life. So you have to make efforts also. You have to travel. You have to, as far as I am concerned, we decided with my wife to read books, or of course there is now something very obvious, which is to listen to series and
So you watch Netflix?
Yeah, well, yes,
Yeah.
and some others.
Some others?
I don't say that too much because I'm
I-
maybe supposed to work. When
I know. What speaking about movies, speaking about culture, what is your favorite American and French movie?
This film called La Folie des Grandeurs is a real light comedy, but I hesitated to speak about him because it's still after a very major work of the French literature.
So La Folie des Grandeurs is your favorite, like
Well,
French one.
One of them.
it comes to my mind, but I guess I should mention Truffaut or.
If we get started on this, we can talk about like French literature and cinema for the whole episode.
There's
I mean,
very rich history in French cinematography. So
love that. What about American movie that comes to your mind that you enjoyed watching?
Maybe I would quote also some films by Hitchcock,
Okay,
Nice.
So yeah.
which are for me summits of the thriller in cinema.
We love that we learned a little bit about you personally, but professionally, can you give us a little background about where you started and like how did you get to where you are today?
I started in a very traditional way in this school called École nationale d'administration, but something not traditional was that I studied mathematics before.
Okay. Yeah, so you have your teaching degree in mathematics, right?
Yes. And then I made a career like a diplomat since it started in 1980, and I was a really lucky diplomat because I had only really incredible opportunities. And since I worked for the president as his diplomatic advisor, it happened that the ambassador who was here in Washington retired, and I had this opportunity to become ambassador of France to the United States. While I had not really been before that, I had been once as a private person with my family, tourists, as a tourist, but I didn't know very well the United States, and so I was really lucky, really privileged to be appointed.
What I always say
3
is-
years ago.
Nice. What I always say is luck is when preparation meets opportunity. It's never just luck. It's not like
Well, thank you for saying that.
It's
You have to you have to
work
seize.
for it. No,
No.
the opportunity. If the opportunity comes and you're not prepared, then it's not going to
It's
happen.
hard work beat talent when talent doesn't work hard. That's what I usually tell myself. It's very interesting that you became the ambassador here, even though you've never really visited the United States itself.
I had visited once in 1998, as I said,
But
with my
only
family.
once.
There is this tradition for families with young kids to, I don't know whether you have done this, to visit the United States, French families, to visit the natural parks in the West, New York.
Yeah.
You didn't do that with your family?
have.
we did all the national parks on the West
Exactly.
Coast. Yeah.
There are many families.
Zion.
The
No,
classic
exactly.
road trip from San Francisco, LA,
Exactly.
Grand Canyon.
Yosemite.
We have done this.
Yeah,
And
it's like-
1998, our kids were
I mean, then
young, but otherwise I didn't know very much about the United States.
Did you like the US better as a tourist or now that you work here? Like, do you see a difference in how you see the country between?
Oh yes, of course. No, well, difficult to compare. I think here I had incredible moments. I arrived when the president was Donald Trump. Then there was the COVID. We had a difficult moments in our bilateral relation last September, and then we had now the war in Ukraine. So I was very lucky also by the number of experiences I could make as ambassador. So there is no comparison, of course, in the depth of your experiences. But still, I don't regret to have had this experience as a tourist in this country, because it's a different experience, and you see also, well, the beauty of the country. And
did things change after Mr. Joe Biden become president here in the United States?
Yes, of course. Many things
What
have
things,
changed.
for example, has changed for you as an ambassador? What changed?
The style is different, but also the type of policy, of course.
Okay.
You mean more, again, the US more active in the multilateral organizations, for instance. So it was quite different.
That brings me to my question about the difference in political system and views between, obviously, France and the United States. How would you say, what is the main difference between American politics and French politics? Like, what do you think, what is the one difference there is between these two systems? Because obviously when you think about politics, like in France, we have like universal healthcare. Like we don't obviously pay that much money to go to college.
Yes, of course, but there are so many differences. The constitutions are different, the countries are different. The US is a presidential system, we are in a semi-presidential system. We have different countries, we have the same
different people,
democratical values, and different people, different traditions. It's fascinating to see how, for instance, we in France have this laïcité, and how it is not easy in the US to understand what it is about. So many differences, and if we come back to the topic of languages, it's also a little. We diplomats, we are like translators or interprets. How to explain your country to the country where you are posted, and also how to explain the country you work in to your country. It's a bit like a translation or an interpretation. It's really interesting. It makes one of the most interesting parts of the job.
You have to understand what they understand in order to get your point across.
No, exactly. The point is, as you said, to understand. Because since the systems are different, the mentalities are different, it's not only about reading what somebody says. It's about, and here the language, the in-depth understanding of a language helps. But even if it is not only linguistic, you have to understand what is behind what is being said, why it is being said. Is it explicit, or are there implicit elements? What is the history of the question, the topic behind it?
That's probably where your teaching background comes into play, where like you're able to understand your audience better and then cater your point to your audience.
I think it helps. I'm not sure either, by the way.
Yeah.
But the analytical way of reasoning, yes, maybe helps.
Yeah.
So would you be able to tell like how the French culture has impacted the American culture? We see so many French words in the English language. We see so many French cities. I mean, French cities names, like here in the United States, for example, Lafayette or Des Moines.
There are two levels here. The English language, which is used as a language of the United States, has been itself impacted very much by the French language. You can visit here in Washington a museum called Planet World, which is a museum of words and languages. And they explain to you that 1/3 of the English language of the English words, of the words in the English language, have French origins. And there have been a number of back and forth between the French and the English languages. And I just discovered yesterday that a word which is the word panel. Panel. Do you think it's French or English at the origin?
I would think French. Panel sounds French to me.
Yeah.
Is it not?
It came from medieval French to English, and it came back from French to English with another meaning.
Okay.
And it remained spelled the same way. While you can find the same back and forth in flirt, to flirt with a girl.
Mm-hmm.
It came back to French, like flirt. Flirter. It's an English origin.
Yeah.
But the English word came from the old medieval French expression.
Interesting. So there's some back and forth.
Compter fleurette.
What you're saying is there's some words.
Yes, they are traveling between the
They're
languages.
traveling back and forth.
Wow.
So some words, some like words or
crazy.
verbs that are originally
Or
French.
another example of another history, there is, if you take the French word chef, it traveled 2 times in different meanings, some centuries, one from the other, into English. It became chief. A chief is leading. It comes from the French chef. And it came again to English as chef, which is the one who cooks.
Yeah, the
Culinary chef.
So the same word in French, chef, was transported 2 times in 2 different meanings to English. So this is the first very fascinating relation between the French and English. Of course, the US is not England, and they have here their own language, their own use of the English language. But you mentioned the influence of French elements in the US, which are more related to the history. As you know, a part of the United States was not discovered but settled by French Canadians, and the French participated to the discovery of the Americas. And they had their own relation with the native Americans they get in touch with. For instance, they mingled with the tribes, Indian tribes, quite a lot more than our other European settlers. The result is that you have a lot of names in the United States. You mentioned some of them.
Yeah, for example, we have like Lafayette, even Grosse-Tête. Literally, there's a city called Big Hat.
Lafayette is something a bit different because it comes from the Marquis Lafayette, who worked for the independence, and so as a token of gratitude, the name of Lafayette was given to more than 120 counties and towns in the United States. But well before that, there were names of places in the U.S. named by French or French Canadian settlers.
Okay, that's a good word to end today's episode. Thank you so much again, and thank you for watching today's Rendez-Vous. If you have any comments, anything, feel free to leave us your thoughts. And à bientôt for another episode of Rendez-Vous. Au revoir.
Merci.
Au revoir.